Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Friday, April 5th. This is day 182 since October 7th. There was big news at the United Nations today in response to Israel's war against Hamas. The United Nations Human Rights Council passed 5 resolutions today, 2 that I wanted to highlight specifically. One that was calling for Israel to be held accountable for possible war crimes, and a second that called for the end of the transfer of arms and military equipment for Israel. The first, the UN Human Rights Council adopted a resolution that Israel would be held accountable for possible war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Gaza. 28 countries voted in favor, 13 abstained, 6 opposed, including the US and Germany. Israel dismissed the resolution's text as distorted. Germany and Bulgaria were the only European states who joined the US in voting no. And then the second UN Human Rights Council resolution was calling for states to end the transfer of all arms and military equipment to Israel. This resolution condemned the alleged use of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare in Gaza and called for an arms embargo on Israel. It called upon all states to cease the sale, transfer, and diversion of arms, munitions, and other military equipment to Israel, and requested the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, to report on both the direct and indirect transfer or sale of arms, munitions, parts, components, and dual-use items to Israel, the occupying power, and to present its report to the Council at its 59th session. While Human Rights Council resolutions at the United Nations are not binding, they do make a strong statement of governments and the international community, aligning with the growing call of international civil society. I did also want to highlight the United States. There's a question about whether or not there may be policy shifts for the Biden administration on the horizon. I have been reticent to acknowledge any movement in that regard, but there may be possibilities that there are movements on the horizon. Yesterday, right after I finished recording my daily video, the Washington Post, so on April 4th, reported that DC's blanket support for Israel, meaning the Biden administration, would change if Israel didn't start listening to US demands about protecting civilians in Gaza and allowing aid into the Palestinian enclave of Gaza. Secretary of State Blinken suggested yesterday, Thursday, this came from Blinken's comments to reporters after the phone call that President Biden had with Netanyahu. The warning that President Biden gave to Netanyahu lacked specifics and came as the Biden administration continued to approve the transfer of thousands of bombs to Israel, despite calls to condition aid in the aftermath of the Israeli airstrike that killed 7 aid workers from the World Central Charity. If we don't see the changes we need to see, there will be changes in our policy. That's a direct quote from Secretary Blinken. His remarks echoed the substance of the readout of Biden's call with Netanyahu. According to the readout, President Biden called on Israel to implement, quote, specific, concrete, and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers, end quote. Adding that, quote, U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate action on these steps, end quote. After that, so almost immediately after the call with Biden, Israel announced new routes would open for aid. So Israel's war cabinet announced that they would allow more aid into Gaza, including opening Erez. Erez is the main checkpoint between Israel and Gaza that goes into the north of Gaza, where the most severe threats of famine are looming and present. And so the Erez checkpoint is supposed to be opened for aid. Now, came out today that the Biden administration said even the announcements coming from Israel may not be enough to meet what the Biden administration is expecting. But this all happened after this call between Biden and Netanyahu. Biden warned that his administration's policy on the war with Gaza could change unless Israel takes steps to ramp up aid provision, bolster the protection of civilians and aid workers in the enclave. Biden also called for an immediate ceasefire and urged Israel to take the initiative to resolve ongoing hostage negotiations, according to a readout of the call. And so John Kirby also reiterated, if we don't see changes from their side, there will be changes from our side, which is quite significant. So we'll see, what that means, but at least the language is a shift in language. In addition to the increased aid, Israel took action where Israel's military dismissed 2 of the officers and reprimanded 3 others for their roles in the drone strikes that killed the World Central Kitchen aid workers. The investigation of that attack also was reported that there were a series of mistakes, including lack of coordination with the IDF, mistaken identification of a man believed to be armed in a targeted vehicle, and the firing of 2 additional missiles after the first hit against Army protocol. According to the IDF, the attack was a blatant violation of the rules of engagement and could have been avoided. Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said today that fixing the IDF's failures in Gaza requires investigations and meaningful, measurable changes on the ground. 196 humanitarian workers have been killed, and we want to know why each and every one of them was killed. Shifting gears today in Jerusalem, this was the first time since Ramadan began that there was an incident on Haram al-Sharif. The Israeli police arrested 8 people at the Al-Aqsa Mosque on suspicion of incitement and the support, quote, of terrorism during dawn prayers. 4 were from East Jerusalem, 4 were from Israel's north. Police also dropped tear gas from drones for the first time since Ramadan began. Around the world today, 30 Israeli embassies were closed as it was a Friday amid fears of the Iranian attack and retaliation for the suspected Israeli airstrike that killed the top Revolutionary Guard earlier this week in Damascus in Syria. We also know that around 4 p.m. Today, Friday, April 5th, the Associated Press reported that President Biden urged Egypt and Qatar to put pressure on Hamas to come to an agreement for Israeli hostages in Gaza. A senior administration official of Biden's national security advisor will meet Monday with family members of the 100 or so hostages that are still held in Gaza. And we know CIA Bill Burns heads to Cairo for the weekend to talk about the hostage crisis. I wanted to take a minute and talk about what the Washington Post, they did a big report on U.S. arms sales to Israel and what they've been since October. I'd encourage you to take a look at this. In December, the administration approved the sale of nearly 14,000 tank ammunition charges and equipment to Israel that was worth $106.5 million, and also the sale of 155 millimeter artillery shells and related equipment worth $147.5 million. The White House bypassed Congress for these sales, so these are below the congressional threshold. These transfers represent only a small portion of total aid. U.S. officials have briefed Congress on more than 100 other transactions that were under a set dollar amount that did not require Congress to even be notified that weapons had been sent to Israel. Among the weapons sold were precision-guided munitions, small diameter bombs, bunker buster rockets, and other lethal aid. People with knowledge of the briefings told the Washington Post in March. We've talked a lot about this presidential security memorandum that the State Department received Israel's written assurances ahead of the March 24th deadline that they are using U.S. weapons in accordance with international humanitarian law. The State Department now has until May to formally assess whether or not those assurances are credible and to report that to Congress. The State Department spokesperson Matt Miller said on March 25th there were no indications that Israel was in legal violation of international humanitarian law. But humanitarian groups have been calling on the Biden administration and have said that they don't accept Israel's assurances at face value. They say Israel, despite its insistence otherwise, is impeding the flow of aid into Gaza by truck, through long inspections at checkpoints, by refusing to open new ones, giving ongoing hostilities in Gaza. The Israeli government's assurances to the Biden administration that it's meeting U.S. legal requirements is not credible, said Sarah Yeager, the Washington director at Human Rights Watch. In a letter to the Biden administration released on March 27th, 17 Democratic senators said that the acceptance of assurances from the Netanyahu government would be inconsistent with the letter and spirit of Biden's national security memorandum and would set an unacceptable precedent for other situations around the world. And I just wanted to close by identifying one of the things that's happened in the last couple of days is the stories about who these people are from the World Central Kitchen are being told. And if you haven't read the op-ed by the founder of the World Central Kitchen in the New York Times, I encourage you to read that. But one of the gentlemen killed was a U.S. Canadian citizen. His name was Jacob Flickinger, and he went to the Gaza Strip 3 weeks ago to distribute food with the World Central Kitchen. He asked his father to tell his mother he was going to Cyprus. He didn't want her to worry. He planned to leave at the end of the week, he told his father on Sunday via text, and the two wished each other a happy Easter. The next day, the 33-year-old was killed, one of the 7 killed in the Israeli airstrike. He was a good man, his father said. He was doing what he loved, and he wanted to serve and help others. Jacob was born and spent most of his childhood in a small city in Quebec. He was the son of a Canadian mother and an American father. Flickinger had spent nearly a decade in the Canadian Armed Forces. He did a tour of duty in Afghanistan, where he had served there. But after leaving the military, he met his partner, Sandy Leclerc, and they had a baby boy. And the couple moved to Costa Rica, where Flickinger began to build a business as a fitness trainer. And to support his family, he took on other opportunities. And he had his first stint with the World Central Kitchen last November, where he spent a month in Mexico after a major hurricane. When a friend told him about the World Central Kitchen's mobilization in Gaza, he volunteered to help distribute food shipments arriving by sea. The work combination of skills that he had learned in the military and his desire to help is what sent him there. Women and children are starving to death, and it is all over the news every day, he said. And it was his desire to make a difference. And so I want us to remember him and every person that has lost their life trying to help those who are in need, and every life that has been lost in Gaza or in Israel as a result of the catastrophes since October 7th and as a result of occupation and war and violence. May that motivate us in our call for a comprehensive ceasefire and our calls for peace and our calls for justice and human rights.